May your day and week be filled with divine blessings as we welcome you to today's deep dive.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really great to be here for this one.
Because, imagine this. You're marching through a brutal, unforgiving wilderness for 40 long years.
Right, an entire lifetime for some of them.
Exactly. You are just completely exhausted. You are coated in desert dust, and you finally reach the very edge of this lush, green home you've been promised your entire life.
The finish line is right there.
But then you discover that the border is guarded by an army of literal giants.
Yeah, not exactly a warm welcome.
Not at all. Giants and 60 heavily fortified cities. So today we are opening up the detailed study notes from the Holman and NAA Bibles regarding Deuteronomy chapter 3.
Which is just a packed chapter.
Oh, it really is. We are pulling back the curtain on one of the most intense, strategically impossible moments in ancient history.
Right, because if you thought ancient historical texts were just, dry lists of genealogies and dusty geography, well, buckle up.
Yeah, we are exploring a campaign against a massive king, the bizarre historical relic of a giant iron bed.
That part is always so fascinating to me.
Right. And we're also looking at a high-stakes real estate deal that honestly defies all military logic. And finally, the genuinely heartbreaking final request of one of history's most legendary leaders.
It really is a profoundly dense chapter, both historically and emotionally.
So lay the groundwork for us. Where are we physically in this moment?
Well, to ground us in the setting, the Israelites are standing in what is called the Transjordan.
Okay, so that's east of the river.
Exactly. It's this wild frontier just east of the Jordan River. They've survived decades of wandering, and they are literally looking across the water at the Promised Land.
But they can't just cross yet, right?
No, they have to secure this eastern bank first. And the sources we're using today, the Holman and NAA notes, they're crucial because they don't just recount the battles.
They give us the subtext.
Right. They force us to look at the deeper theological machinery working behind the scenes. We're going to look at the why behind the military strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the very first thing standing in their way isn't, some minor border skirmish.
Far from it.
It's a terrifying, immovable wall. We're talking about the region of Bashan, specifically King Og.
And he brings his forces out to a place called Edrei.
Right, Edrei. And the study notes detail that the Israelites didn't just face an army in an open field, which would be bad enough.
Yeah, a pitched battle is one thing.
But they had to conquer 60 fortified cities in the region of Argob. 60.
It's a staggering number.
And the sources are very clear that these were not little makeshift farming villages with wooden fences.
No, the text desperately wants you to understand the sheer scale of this obstacle. These cities had high stone walls, heavy gates, and literal iron bars.
Which is wild, because you have to put yourself in the sandals of the Israelites at this exact moment.
Right, they are essentially a massive population of nomadic refugees.
They live in tents.
Exactly. They travel with flocks of sheep and goats. They do not have advanced siege engines or catapults or any history of architectural warfare.
So from a purely tactical standpoint, expecting this nomadic group to besiege and conquer even one walled city.
One would be tough.
Right. One city with iron gates would be a monumental, almost laughable task. Asking them to sweep through a deeply entrenched kingdom and dismantle 60 of them simultaneously, it's strategically absurd.
It really is.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the logistics of that. It's like taking a tiny bootstrapped indie startup.
That's a good comparison.
Right, like a startup armed with basically nothing, and they decide to take on 60 massive entrenched tech monopolies at the exact same time. It defies all conventional logic. On paper, it's a guaranteed slaughter of the Israelites.
Which is precisely why the study notes emphasize the very first thing God tells Moses before this campaign begins. He says, "Do not fear."
Which feels like a tall order.
It does, but in this context, the notes point out that it's not just a generic pat-on-the-back pep talk. It is the central operating thesis of the entire campaign.
How so?
Well, the text outlines that, following the model of their previous victory over King Sihon of Heshbon, the destruction of Og's kingdom was total.
Ah, right.
The sources state explicitly that this included men, women, and children, while they kept the livestock and the spoils of the cities.
Wait, I need to pause us right there.
Sure.
Because we cannot just breeze past the total destruction of men, women, and children. For a modern listener, that is an incredibly jarring, heavy concept.
It is extremely heavy.
It's total warfare, and it's a massive moral stumbling block when reading these ancient texts.
Yeah, it is a stark and severe reality of the text, and the biblical narrative presents it plainly, without trying to soften the edges for our modern sensibilities.
Right. It doesn't apologize for it.
No, it doesn't. But the theological study notes provide essential context for why this specific absolute destruction was commanded.
Which is important to understand the why here.
Exactly. The notes argue this wasn't about bloodlust. It was designed as a vital theological model for their future survival in Canaan. The mechanism here is about complete reliance and preventing assimilation.
Assimilation into the Canaanite culture, you mean?
Yes. If the Israelites kept the infrastructure, the systems, and the people of these conquered nations intact, the notes argue they would inevitably adopt their religious and cultural practices.
So they'd fall into syncretism?
Precisely.
They would just sort of slot themselves into the pre-existing Amorite society instead of building the distinct nation they were called to build.
Exactly. The total destruction was a harsh, deeply ingrained lesson. This victory, and the society that follows it, must not rely on captured infrastructure or human military prowess.
Because if they won using Amorite weapons and Amorite tactics, they'd start thinking they did it themselves.
Right. The narrative is constructed to demonstrate that victory comes entirely from trusting God's power. By wiping the slate completely clean, the Israelites were forced to recognize that God was the one fighting for them. They were wholly dependent on Him for their future.
Wow. That brings a completely different weight to the phrase, do not fear.
It really does.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The sheer scale of the architecture in those 60 cities is only half the terror. The text zeroes in on the physical scale of the king who ruled them.
King Og.
Right. King Og wasn't just a powerful monarch. The sources note that he was the last surviving member of the Rephaim.
And the Rephaim, for context, were the legendary giants of the region.
Literal giants. And to prove this, the text mentions a highly specific, almost bizarre physical artifact.
King Og's bed.
Yes, his bed. It was made of iron, and it was kept as a relic in a place called Rabbah of the Ammonites. And the dimensions provided in the study notes are massive.
Yeah, they are huge.
It was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. The sources clarify that a standard cubit is about 46 centimeters, meaning we are talking about a piece of furniture that is roughly 4 meters long and 1.8 meters wide.
That is a 13-foot-long bed.
13 feet.
And what's fascinating here is that the material is just as important as the size.
Because of the iron.
Right. In the late Bronze or early Iron Age, iron was not a common building material.
It wasn't like grabbing some pine from the hardware store.
Not at all. It was premium, rare, and incredibly difficult to forge. It represented absolute cutting-edge technology, immense wealth, and brutal, unyielding strength.
Okay, so my question is, why keep it?
That's the big question.
Was keeping this 13-foot iron bed basically ancient psychological propaganda? I mean, think about it. If you are an Israelite, you have spent your entire life hearing terrifying campfire stories about the Rephaim.
Right, the giants.
An entire generation earlier, the Israelite spies scouted the land, saw the giants, and came back and told the people, we look like grasshoppers next to them.
And that specific fear caused a 40-year delay in the wilderness.
Exactly. So is keeping the bed essentially putting a monstrous relic in a museum to say to the public, look, I know you were terrified, but the boogeyman is actually dead?
The study notes offer a brilliant interpretation that leans directly into that psychological angle, but it actually reframes the artifact itself.
Oh, how so?
The notes suggest that the bed of iron might not have been a piece of bedroom furniture at all. Given the dimensions and the material, it was very likely King Og's sarcophagus.
Wait, really? A massive 13-foot iron coffin?
Yes. And keeping it wasn't just a boastful military trophy. It served a profound theological and psychological purpose.
That makes so much sense.
Like you pointed out, this is a population deeply traumatized by the fear of giants. That fear derailed their destiny 4 decades prior. So displaying this iron sarcophagus was tangible, heavy, undeniable proof.
Like saying, come see for yourself.
Exactly. It was the leadership's way of saying, the giant you're terrified of isn't just defeated, he is permanently boxed up in iron. The era of the Rephaim is definitively over.
Man, that completely transforms how you read that detail. It's not just some ancient Guinness World Record for the biggest bed. It is the physical, heavy burial of a generational trauma.
It's closure.
Yeah, it's absolute closure.
And that closure was an absolute necessity before they can move forward. Because once the giant is dead and those 60 fortified cities are emptied, they aren't done. They suddenly face a completely different kind of challenge.
Right, because once you've buried the boogeyman of your past in an iron box, you suddenly have a future to build. And that creates a massive real estate
A
problem.
huge one.
They just conquered a staggering amount of land east of the Jordan River. The notes say it stretches from the Arnon Gorge all the way up to Mount Hermon.
Which is a vast territory.
And the sources provide some fantastic geographical color on this. Mount Hermon is over 1,800 meters high. It's a massive snowy peak. The text mentions it had different names depending on the local culture. The Sidonians called it Syrian, and the Amorites called it Sinir.
And that geographical note is vital because it shows just how culturally diverse and highly trafficked this northern region was.
It wasn't just empty space.
Exactly. It wasn't an empty wasteland. It was prime, globally recognized territory.
So what does this all mean for them? They have this incredibly valuable land, and they distribute it to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh.
Right. And for those unfamiliar, the half-tribe of Manasseh just means a large clan of that tribe.
Specifically the descendants of Jair and Mashir, who took over areas that became known as Havoth-Jair. But Moses attaches a massive, non-negotiable condition to this land grant.
He does. He tells them they can keep the land, but all of their armed men must cross the Jordan River to fight alongside the rest of Israel to conquer Canaan.
Okay, meaning their wives, their children, and their newly acquired massive herds of livestock are going to stay behind in these freshly conquered fortified cities.
Correct.
Wait, I'm stuck on this. From a tactical standpoint, that is almost criminally negligent.
It seems that way, yeah.
You're telling me Moses ordered all the fighting men to march away across a river, leaving their families and their wealth completely unguarded in a region surrounded by hostile neighbors?
Neighbors who just watched them wipe out King Og.
Exactly. How did a mutiny not happen right there? It's an open invitation for a counterattack.
On a purely military level, it sounds like absolute madness. You never leave your supply lines and your families undefended in newly occupied territory.
Never.
But this is where the study notes bring out a deeply essential, overarching biblical concept. It's the theology of rest.
Rest. Like taking a break?
No. The notes focus heavily on this specific word. Moses tells these men they must fight until God gives their brothers rest, just as he has given them.
But in this context, rest clearly cannot mean kicking your boots off after a long day.
Not at all. The notes make it clear that this rest is a robust, dynamic theological state. It is the experience of profound peace, security, and well-being.
Oh, I see.
It means living in a place that is entirely governed, ordered, and protected by God. The commentators even note that this concept of earthly rest in the Promised Land points toward an ultimate, eternal rest.
So how does that theological concept solve the glaring military vulnerability of leaving their families behind?
Because it forces a radical shift in where their security comes from. Leaving their families wasn't a calculated military risk. It was an act of profound faith.
Trusting the promise instead of the sword.
Exactly. The mechanism is this. If their security relied on their own swords and their own guards, leaving their families would indeed be negligent.
Right.
But if their security relied entirely on God's promise of rest, then their families were inherently safe in his protection. The men were obligated to go help their brothers achieve that same divine security across the river.
They had to truly believe that God was the one maintaining the walls of those 60 cities now, not them.
That's it, exactly.
Think about the sheer anxiety of that march, though. Walking away from your family toward a war zone, looking back over your shoulder, having to completely trust that this divine rest will act as an invisible shield over your wife and children.
It's intense.
That requires a level of conviction that is incredibly difficult to fathom.
It is a beautiful image of communal faith. But the narrative brilliantly and frankly tragically contrasts that communal victory with a deeply personal, agonizing moment for the man who orchestrated the entire journey.
Which brings us to the final segment of our deep dive. The tribes are securing their physical rest, they're literally mapping out their future homes, and Moses receives a devastating reality check.
Yeah, this part is always hard to read.
This is the leader who pulled them out of Egypt, who endured decades of their complaints, who survived starvation and rebellion, bringing them to this exact precipice, and he hits a brick wall.
The notes highlight a desperate, deeply intimate prayer from Moses here. He acknowledges God's absolute superiority over all other gods, and he begs for just one concession.
He doesn't even ask to lead the conquest anymore, right?
No, he just asks to cross the Jordan River. He says he wants to see the good land, the hill country, and Lebanon.
He just wants to step foot on the grass, just
Ah.
once, after 40 years of sand and rock.
Yeah.
But God's response is shocking. The sources say God is indignant with Moses.
Right, and God says it's because of, you're referring to the rebellious nature of the people of Israel and a previous failure of holiness on Moses' part.
And then God shuts the entire conversation down with a definitive command. Enough. Speak no more to me of this matter.
It is a chilling, abrupt stop. Think about the fact that Moses is described elsewhere as speaking to God face to face like a friend.
Right.
And here, that friend essentially says, enough. Instead of crossing, God tells Moses to climb to the top of Mount Pisgah.
The study notes place this in the Abarim mountain range, directly facing the Arabah and the Dead Sea.
Yes, and God tells him to look north, south, east, and west with his own eyes.
He gets to see the entirety of the promise, but he cannot enter it.
It's agonizing.
I was trying to find an analogy that captures the emotional weight of this. It's like, imagine a brilliant company founder working 40 grueling years to build a revolutionary product.
Okay.
They sacrifice everything, and then they are forced by the board to step down on the exact eve of the IPO, having to watch the new CEO ring the bell.
Oh, that's brutal. But it's accurate.
It highlights this agonizing burden of leadership in love, doing all the work for a reward you will never personally touch.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that captures the emotional and theological reality perfectly. The poignancy of this scene at Mount Pisgah is profound. Moses is granted the vision, but he is flatly denied the victory lap.
Yeah.
And the study notes draw critical attention to what God commands immediately after that denial. While Moses is standing there, likely crushed by the finality of it all, God tells him to commission, encourage, and strengthen Joshua.
Oh, man. He has to train his replacement
Hmm.
in the exact moment of his greatest personal disappointment.
That is the ultimate test of his character. The narrative shifts entirely away from Moses' personal reward, zooming out to the continuity of God's plan.
The plan is bigger than him.
Exactly. The divine mechanism doesn't stop because Moses is disappointed. It continues through Joshua. Moses has to find the internal fortitude to put his ego aside completely. He cannot wallow in the fact that he won't cross the river. His final duty is to ensure Joshua is perfectly equipped to lead the people who will.
It makes you wonder, can you build something that survives without you? And can you be at peace with not getting the credit at the finish line?
It's a hard question.
The text explicitly states that Joshua is the one who will cause the people to inherit the land that Moses is only allowed to look at from a distance.
It's a deeply sobering reminder that in these grand theological narratives, the individual, even someone as monumental, legendary, and faithful as Moses, is ultimately a servant to a much larger purpose. The overarching goal was the divine rest of the community, not the glorification of the leader who brought them there.
We have covered incredible ground today. We've gone from the brutal mechanics of total warfare against giant-ruled cities.
To the psychological weight of a 13-foot iron sarcophagus.
Right. And the radical faith of leaving families behind all the way to the intimate, quiet heartbreak on top of Mount Pisgah. It is a brilliant, heavy tapestry of history and theology.
It forces the reader to grapple with the absolute extremes of human ambition, fear, and divine sovereignty.
It really does. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the Holman and NAA study notes, I want to turn this directly back to you, the listener. Because while you are likely not facing down 60 walled cities or trying to figure out what to do with a giant iron coffin.
Hopefully not.
Right, hopefully not. But we all have our own Jordans to cross. We all have businesses, families, art, or communities where we pour in years of our labor, our stress, and our absolute deepest love, sometimes knowing we may never get to see the ultimate finish line ourselves.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. Building on this incredible, haunting narrative of Moses looking out from Mount Pisgah, if Moses' ultimate crowning legacy was not stepping into the promised land himself, but rather perfectly positioning Joshua and the next generation to do so, how much of our own success in life should be measured not by the finish lines we personally cross, but by the strong foundations we lay for those who come after us?
That's definitely something to think about.
It is a heavy, beautiful question, and one deeply worth carrying with you. God blesses all the listeners.